Ditch the cans and never look back, because everything's better when you make it from scratch. Hey guys, it's Jara with Wicked Prepared. Welcome to the channel. Today I'm sharing my recipes for homemade copycat versions of 3 very popular Campbell soups in a dry mix form. With these recipes, you'll never have to buy one of those cans again. It's so easy to grab a can off the shelf, so why would you want to make it? A lot of people are taking a hard look at the ingredients that are in the packaged convenience foods that we buy at the store, and they're deciding there's some things in there they'd rather avoid. Things like MSG and canola oil, high sodium, and bioengineered ingredients. When you make it yourself, you control the ingredients. You can avoid things that you don't want in your food and adjust things like sodium to your needs. Another reason for homemade mixes is convenience. You can make these mixes up in bulk, and then you never have to worry about running to the store to grab a can at the last minute. It's also great if you're single or you have a small family and you don't always need a whole can at a time. With a dry mix, you can easily cut it in half, make half a batch at a time, or any other quantity that you need. The third reason for doing it yourself is cost savings. Often we pay for convenience and we can save money by making it ourselves. It's important to keep in mind, though, that's not always the case, especially when we're choosing higher quality ingredients. I'm going to talk more about that at the end of the video, but if cost is a deciding factor for you, be sure to do some math before you dive in. The soups I'm making today are 3 of Campbell's most popular classic condensed soups: cream of mushroom, cream of chicken, and tomato soup. These are 3 soups that I use all the time. The cream soups I use as ingredients in other dishes. They make it easy to whip up a casserole, and they're part of many of my family's favorite dinners. Tomato soup is one I use as both an ingredient in dishes like American chop suey and chili mac, and as a standalone soup that my kids love to have with a grilled cheese sandwich on a chilly day. These mixes get a lot of use in my pantry. Let's get started, and I'll show you how I put together my versions of these mixes. All right, I'm going to be starting with my cream of chicken soup mix. Now, I'm going to be making this up in a big mixing bowl so I can mix it evenly, making a big batch, and then I'm going to transfer it into my jar for storage. The first ingredient I'm using today is an instant milk powder. Now, you can use whole milk powder or non-fat instant milk powder. What I've got today is non-fat. It can decrease the shelf life a little bit if you use a whole fat milk powder, but use what you like. If you like creamy richness, use a milk powder that you like the flavor of, because that's going to set the tone for your recipe. So I always store a milk powder that we like the flavor of. I just want to store one milk powder and not have, something for recipes and something for drinking and things like that. For many years, my favorite instant milk powder has been Thrive Life, and I still have plenty of that, but it's no longer available for people who need to buy their instant milk powder. So I'm using a different brand in this today that I tested out to make sure that I could recommend that for anyone who does have to find an instant milk to use. I am still doing testing to find what's going to be my new favorite instant milk to recommend for people. So if you have favorite brands that you really like, leave them down below in the comments so that I know to kind of narrow down my testing, because I don't want to have to buy hundreds and hundreds of different milk powders. I'm going to be using 1.5 cups of this instant milk today. So there's 1 cup and there's 1/2 cup. One thing to think about when you're choosing your instant milk, the instant milk powders that I've used in this recipe call for 3 tablespoons of mix for each cup of water. So that's going to be important because you want the volume and the amount of milk that it provides to be equal. So look for one that calls for 3 tablespoons of mix for each cup of water, as well as one that you enjoy the flavor of. My next ingredient is going to be some heavy cream powder. Now, some people wouldn't want to use heavy cream powder because it is a higher fat ingredient and it could decrease the shelf life a little bit. I haven't had much trouble using heavy cream powder in many of my jar meals and mixes, and I've had my heavy cream powder last a lot longer than what people say that it will, especially if it's stored airtight. I've learned a lot, not just airtight, but with oxygen removed. I've learned a lot over my years of freeze drying and working with freeze-dried food and dealing with the freeze-dried food industry, that if things are stored without oxygen, then fats can last a lot longer than what people think that they will. So I'm okay with using this in my mix. If you don't want to use heavy cream powder, you could always just use an equal amount of the milk powder, add an extra 1/2 cup of the milk powder, but I'm using 1/2 cup of heavy cream powder because the can of soup that I'm replicating does use cream. You can see that it uses cream in the soup, and I am trying to replicate this very closely. Next, I'm going to be using some cornstarch. I'm doing 3/4 of a cup of cornstarch, and I absolutely love that this measuring cup set that I got comes with a 3/4 cup measure, because that's the only set I've ever had that did. And I think it's handy for things like this. So I'll try to link this down below in the description in case anybody wants a set like this, because not all sets come with a 3/4 cup measure. So there's 3/4 of a cup of cornstarch. And then I'm also using some flour. So I'm using a 1/2 cup of flour for some additional thickening. Now, if you are gluten-free, you could use a gluten-free flour as long as you know that it works cup for cup with regular flour and it thickens like regular flour. Next, I'm going to be adding my chicken bouillon. Now, I'm using Knorr chicken bouillon in this recipe. You can use any chicken bouillon you like. Once again, it should be a bouillon that you like the flavor of, but it can make a difference which brand you use. So use one that you like, and I'm giving the recommendation of the brand I use because it works in this recipe. I actually tried this with this Maggi bouillon that I have used this before in soups and different things and really liked it. In this recipe, I didn't really like it. It was a little too salty. It had a weird artificial flavor and color. And so I went with the Knorr, which has a little bit less sodium per teaspoon. So I ended up liking this one much better. I do like to let you know what brands that I use because sometimes the brand does make a difference. But definitely go with a bouillon that you enjoy the flavor of and you are okay with the ingredients that are in it. Being aware that the brand can change the outcome somewhat. I'm using a 1/4 cup of bouillon today. Now this is a good place to adjust the saltiness and the flavor of this mix because most of the saltiness is going to come from this bouillon. So if your soup mix tastes too salty, you can cut down on the bouillon. It could depend on the amount or it could depend on the brand, like I mentioned. And if you feel like you have not enough flavor, you might need more bouillon. But this is a good amount for me when I'm using this brand of bouillon. So a 1/4 cup of the chicken bouillon. Next, I'm going to add some nutritional yeast. This is going to give a savory richness to this soup mix, and this is going to give it that umami flavor. That is what they traditionally use the MSG for. MSG gives that umami flavor, and so this is going to take the place of that because a lot of people like to avoid MSG in their food. So this is going to give us that savory umami richness without the MSG. So 1 tablespoon of the nutritional yeast. And next, I'm going to be adding some carrot juice powder. Now, this is going to be mostly for color. It's also going to give it a little bit of sweetness. If you look at the can of Campbell's, you can see that it uses beta-carotene for color. And beta-carotene is a lot of what gives carrots their color. So this carrot juice powder is going to do the same thing for us in our soup mix. It does have a scoop in here because this is something you can use for smoothies or different things like that. But I'm going to be just using a tablespoon of it. So 1 tablespoon of the carrot juice powder. Next, I'm using some onion powder, a 1/2 tablespoon of the onion powder, and then some garlic powder. Also a 1/2 tablespoon of the garlic powder. And finally, I'm using some turmeric. This is just for color. This is going to give it a little bit of yellow color because when I looked at my my soup mix, when it was mixed up, it was much less yellow and whiter than the Campbell's. And just for purely for looks and aesthetics, it's not important to have that color. I just kind of wanted to have it. And remember, sometimes the brighter or deeper colors in the foods we buy at the grocery store, sometimes they come from some of those ingredients that we want to keep out of our food. So it's okay if our food is not as colorful as the grocery store foods, but sometimes you can find ways that are a little bit healthier, like carrot juice and turmeric, to add that color back in so that you have something that looks like the original product. Now I am going to start to mix all of these ingredients together. I want to get these really well mixed because I want to make sure that every batch of soup that we make is going to be evenly flavored, evenly colored, evenly thickened. So I want to make sure that the ingredients get very well distributed. So I'm going to whisk this for a little bit. You can see little brown bits in there that are little flakes of the nutritional yeast that we put in. And so some of these things that we put in to take the place of some of those other ingredients, like the MSG and the beta-carotene, these are actually healthy ingredients. So nutritional yeast is really pretty good for you. So we're using that in place of something that's maybe not as good for you. I'm even going to take my scraper spatula and just scoop up from the bottom just to make sure that there's no bits or areas that did not get mixed evenly. I want to make sure that everything from the edges, the sides, the bottom gets evenly mixed. And I'll just do a little more with the whisk. All right, I think that's pretty good. Now I'm going to go ahead and transfer this into the jar where I'm going to store it. All right, I am going to put this into a half-gallon jar, which I think will give us some room to spare, but it should fit. All right. Here is our cream of chicken soup mix, ready to go on the shelf. But I am not just going to put this on the shelf. Before I put this away, I'm going to make up a batch and show you how it comes out. I'm going to mix this up on my butane emergency stove. And I'm going to start by adding my water to the pot, which is going to be cold water. I'm using 1 1/3 cups of cold water. So there's 1 cup and there's 1/3 cup. So I've got 1 1/3 cups of cold water. And now my mix. I'm going to be using 1/2 cup of my mix for this. And my measurements are based on the fact that I'm trying to replicate exactly 1 can of the condensed soup. So I'm trying to create exactly what I would get if I opened up a can of the condensed soup and dumped it right out into a dish. Because I use this, like I mentioned, I use this as an ingredient in a lot of casseroles and dishes. And so I want my ingredient to be exactly the same or as close to the same as I can get so that I can know that I'm going to get a uniform result for my recipe. I want to make sure that my recipes that I love are going to turn out exactly the same flavor, exactly the same texture, and all of that. So I'm using 1/2 cup of mix to 1 1/3 cups of cold water. And another really important component is going to be my sauce whisk. This is something pretty new that I recently got, and you can see the shape of this whisk. It is meant to get into the edges of pans like this when you are doing something like a sauce or a gravy like this. Because when I used to use this type of a whisk, no matter how hard I tried, no matter how much I whisked and did all sorts of different things, I always got powder left in the corners of the pan down here. And this whisk is meant to easily get into all the corners of the pan, and it's just really meant and designed for whisking sauces and things like that. It's also got, you might not be able to see it very well, but it's got like almost a rubbery type of coating over the metal parts of the whisk so that it doesn't damage your pan if you have some kind of a coating on your pan, like a nonstick pan, or I have ceramic coated because I'm trying to get away from the nonstick coating, which is pretty bad for your health. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get this on the heat. Pretty high because I really just want to get it to come up to a simmer, up to a boil and thicken, and that's all we need. It's just going to take a few minutes. You can see the little bits in there. Those are little bits of seasoning from the bouillon that I used. I didn't add anything like pepper or parsley or thyme or any of those, basil. I wouldn't want basil in a cream of chicken soup anyways. I might have used thyme, but when I look at the can of Campbell's cream of chicken, I don't see any little bits. I don't see any little green seasonings, and so I don't want to include those in my recipe. So I just have the ones that came with the bouillon just because I couldn't get away from that. But I am trying to replicate the Campbell's recipe as closely as I can. But if you wanted to add other herbs and seasonings to yours, if you wanted to throw in some parsley, some thyme, something like that, feel free. This whisk just fits so nicely in your hand too. It's such a natural motion to be whisking around like this. You can tell this is about to come to a boil because it is thickening right up and really changing in the way it looks. So once this comes to a boil, I really just need to boil it for a very brief amount of time just to make sure that the flour is cooked all the way. The cornstarch doesn't take but a second to really thicken. So I'm just going to let it go for a minute here, and that's it. I don't want to overdo it because I don't want to break down any of the starches that are thickening. All right, that is looking good. So I'm going to turn the heat off. Now this is pretty thick, and it's going to thicken more as it cools. Like I mentioned, I am going for an exact duplicate of a can of Campbell's soup in its condensed state. So I want it to be thick like that Campbell's when you open the can and it's a big kind of congealed mass. That's kind of what I'm going for. And I want this to fill the can, at least fill the can. I want to fill it just about exactly, but I'd rather have a little bit more than a little bit less because, once again, it's an ingredient in recipes. And I'd rather have a little too much than a little too little. And I do have my empty Campbell's can here that I washed out so that I could pour this soup into it so I can make sure that I have the right amount. You can see that that is just about perfect for 1 can of Campbell's condensed soup. It's pretty thick now. It's going to thicken as it sits. This is still really hot. And it's going to be just like a can of Campbell's condensed chicken, cream of chicken soup. Perfect for our recipes. And of course, if you wanted to have this as a soup, then you would just like you would with a can of Campbell's, you would just dump it out and add 1 soup can full of water or milk, and then you would have your soup. Before I move on to the next recipe, I have something really important to share with you. If you're watching this video, I think it's safe to assume that you're the kind of person who's always looking for better options, and you don't mind a little extra work for something worthwhile. Maybe you're starting to realize that the big mega corporations that control so much of what we buy don't always have our best interests at heart, especially when it comes to our health. You're looking for ways to stop supporting the mega conglomerations and big box stores full of products that are made overseas in places that we don't necessarily trust. If this sounds like you, you're a lot like me. I've taken on a new project that's aimed at combating all of these issues I just mentioned. It's a big project, so I'm looking for some help. I'm forming a team from this community to work closely with me on this project. If you feel passionate about these issues, you want to make a difference, and you could use some side income, this might be the perfect opportunity for you. I'm looking for people who are 18 or older and live in the US or Canada. You need to have a phone and a computer or a tablet, know how to read, and basically just be a nice person. If you can say yes to those things, I'm holding a Zoom meeting in a few days for people to get some more information and see if this might be a good fit. I'd love to see you there. I have a link down below where you can register for the Zoom. As of right now, there are still a few spots left. If you can't access that link, text FREEDOM to my text number and I will send you the link. And if you can't make the time of the Zoom call, fill out the form anyways, the registration form, and then I'll have your info and I'll know you're interested. So we can stay connected and I can get you some info down the road if any more spots open up. Okay, now for the next recipe. Next, I'm doing my cream of mushroom soup mix. Cream of mushroom is very near and dear to my heart because it's used in my tuna casserole recipe, which was the first dish that my mother ever taught me to cook as a little girl. The first recipe I ever knew by heart, and still to this day, one of my favorite recipes. My cream of mushroom soup mix is similar to the cream of chicken, but there are some differences. A lot of people will just take their cream of chicken recipe and kind of use it as a basic cream of anything and just change it up by adding mushrooms for cream of mushroom, freeze-dried or dehydrated, celery for cream of celery, and so on and so forth. And you can certainly do that, especially if you don't want to have multiple jars in your pantry. But I like to do my cream of mushroom just a little differently. For the cream of mushroom, once again, I'm starting with the instant milk powder. I'm doing 1.5 cups of the instant milk powder. There's 1 cup and 1/2 cup. And next, heavy cream powder. 1/2 cup of the heavy cream powder, and next some cornstarch. 3/4 cup of the cornstarch, and I'm also doing 1/2 cup of flour. Now up until that point, it's the same as the cream of chicken, and this is where it starts to get a little different. I'm using chicken bouillon powder, but this time I'm only using 1/8 cup of the chicken bouillon powder. 1/8 cup is the same as 2 tablespoons, so if you don't have 1/8 cup measure, then you can use 2 tablespoons. So I've got 1/8 cup of the chicken bouillon. And next I'm using some mushroom powder. Now I tested a bunch of different mushroom powders. This is the one I ended up going with because of the ingredients and the sourcing. So I'll have a link to this down in the description below. I'm using 1/8 cup of the mushroom powder. Once again, that's 2 tablespoons. And next I'm using some freeze-dried diced mushrooms. Now I found these and they are absolutely perfect for this, but if you have like sliced freeze-dried mushrooms, you could always just chop them up yourself or crumble them up yourself. But I thought this was so easy to just pour them right out of here and dump them. And this is the perfect size and everything. It's worked perfectly in this recipe and they're delicious. Next I'm using some onion powder. 1/2 tablespoon of the onion powder, and garlic powder. Also 1/2 tablespoon of that. I'm going to add some nutritional yeast, and that I'm adding a tablespoon of. Once again, that gives more of that umami flavor, a nice savory richness. I'm adding a teaspoon of salt, and also a teaspoon of celery salt. And that's it for the ingredients. So now just to get this all blended together, just like with the other recipes. This smells so good and mushroomy. If you love that mushroom smell, this smells amazing. All right, now we're going to get this into a jar for storage, and I'll whip up a batch to show you. And there's our cream of mushroom soup mix all ready to go on the shelf. Now let me fix up a batch to show you how this one comes out. For the cream of mushroom, we're also going to start with 1 1/3 cups of water, cold water. And I'm going to use a 1/2 cup of the mix. I'll get this all whisked in. And now I'm going to get the heat on it. And just like the other mixes, we just have to bring this up to a bubble until it thickens and it'll be all ready to go. All right, there we go. Now it's bubbling. All right, I'd say that's good. I'm going to turn this off. And I've got my cream of mushroom can. And there's our cream of mushroom, and it is delicious. And finally, for the tomato soup. For the tomato soup, I'm starting with flour. I've got all-purpose flour here. I'm going to use a cup of flour, 1 cup. This is making about 8 cans worth, about an 8 times batch. And next, I'm using instant milk. I'm also using a cup of the instant milk, 1 cup. And next ingredient is tomato powder. Now this one's going to be a little hard to measure because tomato powder is super sensitive to humidity in the air and all of that stuff, and it can clump really easily. I keep my tomato powder in a mason jar, so it's going to be a little difficult measuring. I need 2 2/3 cups of the tomato powder. So I'm going to measure it 1/3 of a cup at a time. I think that'll be the easiest thing to do. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So there's 2 cups and 1/3, 2/3. Next thing I'm using is granulated brown sugar. So you can see in this container, it is just brown sugar, but it is more free-flowing and dry than regular brown sugar. So this is what I use when I'm doing dry mixes, jar meals, things like that, because I don't want that extra moisture. So I need 3/4 of a cup of this granulated brown sugar. 1, 2, 3/4 of a cup. And next I need some salt. Now I need 4 teaspoons of salt, and in the interest of scooping less, I know that 1 tablespoon is the same as 3 teaspoons. So I'm going to do 1 tablespoon plus a teaspoon. So that's 4 teaspoons. And then I'm using celery salt, 2 teaspoons of the celery salt. And then finally, 1 teaspoon of garlic powder. And that's all there is to it. Now, just like with the other mixes, I'm going to mix these as thoroughly as I possibly can. Going to use my scraper as well, just to scrape up the bottom and the sides. And do a little more whisking just for good measure. Now I'm going to get this into the jar, and then I will mix you up 1 batch of soup so you can see how it comes out. All right, I'm going to be putting this one into a 1/2 gallon jar as well. All right, there we go. There's our Campbell's tomato soup, condensed soup mix. This should make about 8 batches of soup. All right, now this one's going to have slightly different ratios. Once again, I'm using 1 1/3 cups of water, but this time I'm using 3/4 of a cup of the mix. It's 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. So again, I've got my sauce whisk. This all whisked in. See, nothing in the corners of the pan. All right, let's get the heat on this. This one you do have to just be a tiny bit more careful with, that it doesn't scorch on the bottom. It must be the tomato because it's not the milk, because we've got milk products in the other soups and I didn't have that issue. So I really didn't have an issue, but it's just, you can tell that you could have an issue. So I just watch this one a little bit more carefully, put the heat a little bit lower, and just make sure that I'm whisking it and that I get it off the heat in a timely fashion. Now this one we have to be a little bit more careful just to make sure that, number 1, we don't scorch it, and number 2, that it does cook fully and thicken fully, because this one has just the flour and not the cornstarch. The other ones are more cornstarch based. But you can see it is bubbling, and you can see it has thickened. So I'm just going to give it another few seconds and we'll be all done. Now remember, these are going to be thick. They're going to be very thick, and they're going to be pretty flavorful because they are the condensed form of the soup. So they're the more concentrated form of the soup. So that is how we want them. All right, I've got my tomato soup can here. This one suffered a little bit from me washing it, but so let's get our soup into the can. Well, there we go. See, this one is pretty full, but like I said, I'd rather have a little too much than a little too little. And there is our Campbell's condensed tomato soup. That one also is going to thicken as it sets as well. There you have it. 3 shelf-stable pantry mixes you can use to replace all those cans in your pantry. It feels so good to fill our shelves with homemade convenience foods that are made from scratch with love. I did want to touch on the budget factor for just a minute. Oftentimes we can save money by making something from scratch, but that's not always the case, especially if we're choosing higher quality ingredients or avoiding specific ingredients, like if we're buying organic or gluten-free. Sometimes it costs more. You can do the math to figure out the cost of each component you use to figure out if you're saving money or not, if budget is the biggest factor for you. The basic ingredients are very inexpensive, things like flour, cornstarch, and bouillon. In my recipes, I added a few extra ingredients because I was after a specific result, and the results that I got with those additions made it well worth it to me. No matter what ingredients you use, there are things you can do to keep your costs down. Look for sales and discounts on the ingredients. Buy low. Many of the ingredients that I used, I bought at a 50% discount or more. I have a couple of resources available to help with this. You can join my Facebook Prepping Deals and Steals group, where I post deals that I find, discount codes, things like that on items for your prepper pantry. You can also text alert to my text number, and I will add you to my list and send you a text whenever there's a great deal or coupon code for a great prepping item. Besides looking for deals, you can often get better prices if you buy ingredients in bulk. If you don't think you can use it up within its shelf life, see if a friend or family member wants to split it with you. You can also sometimes save money by making certain things yourself, like you could probably make the tomato powder or the mushroom powder, for example. I'm not saying it's not going to save you money making these things homemade. I'm just saying you can't always assume that to be the case, but there are ways to keep your costs down, and there's lots of reasons besides cost to make these homemade soup mixes. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, leave me a mushroom, chicken, or tomato emoji down below to let me know which soup you want to try. It's officially soup season, and I have a whole collection of meal in a jar soups if you want to fill your pantry. I'm going to leave one of those videos right up here for you to watch next. I'm Jara with Wicked Prepared. Survive today, thrive tomorrow. We'll see you next time.